Hello, this is my first aid for acute stress video. It's designed to show you what to do in the moments of acute stress or a panic attack or an anxiety attack, how to deal with that in those moments when it matters. My name's Nigel Donovan. I'm a specialist executive leadership coach. I apply the principles of neuropsychotherapy to my clients and show them how to grow a brain that is more open, more clear, more connected, and to think well. I'm kind of like a personal trainer, but for mental health rather than physical health. I coach CEOs and business owners. I coach individuals and leaders all over the country in Australia. And I've been doing so for over 5 years in my own practice and 15 years overall. The goal ought to be, really, not to get a panic attack in the first place. But we'll get to that later on. Let's talk about what happens in those moments. First of all, where do they come from? Well, they can come from a sudden onset. You see something or experience something that is highly affecting, or it could come from a build-up over many months of pressure that some small bit of evidence or some small bit of stimulus just push you over the edge. But what actually happens and what actually gets to that point is not really important for this conversation. For this conversation, it's about let's put the fire out first before we worry about how the fire started. And this conversation is about putting that fire out. What's going on? There's a mismatch in your brain between the way your brain thinks the world ought to be and the way the brain thinks the world is. It's what's called an uncontrollable incongruence. What's that mean? Uncontrollable incongruence. It's when the brain cannot control this significant mismatch between the way the world is and the way the world ought to be. Real or imagined, that disjoint is where the problem is. Now, your brain loves you to be safe. It doesn't care if you're happy necessarily, but safety is the number one value for your brain. So how is it going to measure safety? Well, it measures it through, among other things, consistency. How consistent is what I'm seeing in the world match what I think I should be seeing in the world? And in particular in three core areas of consistency. They are neurobiological needs for orientation and control. So do I know where I am and what I'm doing? If you've ever missed the bottom step on going down some stairs and you get that balance loss, you know how immediately uncomfortable that is. So do I know where I am and what I'm doing? Orientation and control. Number two is pain avoidance and pleasure seeking. Pretty obvious, really. Your body does not like you experiencing pain. So when you step on your child's Lego, it gets your attention quickly. And the third of those is attachment, which is the connection and it goes to status, it goes to how well connected with people you are. And this is important for evolved apes living in tribes. If you weren't in the tribe, there's a good chance you would die. So from a brain's perspective, being part of the gang is pretty important. So when these areas are compromised and significantly compromised, your brain will hit the panic button. Now the panic button is a little kit in your brain called the amygdala. You may have heard it. It's a small bit of kit. You've got two, one on either side. And it's essentially, you step on something painful, your brain taps that. And it does a range of things. It sets up a cascade of chemicals and a cascade of responses, which culminate in you being able to move quickly. It's the fight-flight stuff that you've probably heard about. It dials up adrenaline, cortisol, it dials up your heart rate, it dials up your lung capacity, your vision gets slightly longer. It does a whole range of things. But when that's smashed too much, too hard, too big, it can overwhelm the system, which is what a panic attack essentially does. Another thing that it does is it dials down your ability to think. The part of your brain up here, the prefrontal cortex, that does your strategic thinking and your what you might call your rational thought is compromised. You don't get blood flow to that point. The amygdala actually sends a signal to the front of the brain or the anterior cingulate gyrus to cut that down. You don't get blood flow there. So you can't think. You literally can't think clearly. Now, what do you do about it when you're in those moments? What do you do? Well, overall, we're trying to get some consistency and control back to your brain. We're trying to give your brain some evidence that it's got control over the world. So that's the overriding theme. And as Robert Frost, the poet, American poet, said, the fastest way out is always through. So don't try and stop it. You're better off allowing it to pay attention, allowing it to arise and pass through. It's much, much faster than trying to prevent something like that. So there are 5 steps to take. The first step is to sit. Sit down, not lay down, sit down. Or lean against a wall with your back against the wall. You do this because it gives your brain something to do. Your cerebellum and top of the brainstem, which do the balancing and walking, it gives it something to do. and that gives it a sense of control. It starts building up evidence that it's in control. So if you're sitting down and having to balance, that's giving your brain something to do. So step 1, sit down. Step 2, breathe out. All right. Out, you'd think, take a deep breath in, right? But your chest is already constricted, probably. Your breath is already shallow. So if you try and breathe in during that moment, it's going to actually make you feel less comfortable because you'll be fighting against your own chest. So if you breathe out, the natural thing that your body's going to do, like it's done 1,000 million times before, is breathe in afterwards. So that's the second step. The third step is to breathe slowly. Now, when you're relaxed, you breathe slowly, and when you're anxious, you breathe fast or rapidly. And we always think that I get anxious and therefore I breathe fast and more rapidly, or when I'm calm, I breathe slowly. But it's a one-way street, but it's not. It works the other way as well. So if you're breathing slowly, it provides evidence to your brain that things aren't as bad as they might otherwise be. Another thing that it does, by intentionally breathing slowly, you're actually getting the front of your brain to do something. You're engaging it to do something, to proactively breathe in a certain way, which is pretty important for that sense of control. Also, you're integrating the front of your brain with the middle emotional parts of your brain and the deeper brainstem and cerebellum, because that's the part that does the breathing. So if you intentionally breathe, you're connecting your brain and integrating your brain a little bit more across from the base right up to the front. And that can be really powerful for your brain to get some control. So that's the third thing, to breathe slowly. The fourth thing is to take a sip of water, a drink. It does a couple of things. One, it cools the system, which helps. And the second thing it does, if you focus on the water and focus on the drinking, it's actually paying attention to the moment. So you'll find that your brain is again dialing into this moment, into the reality and the moment you're in, and not loose and uncontrollable. So they're all just adding elements of control and elements of orientation to your brain. Then the fifth thing and the last thing is just wait 5 minutes. If you've been for a jog up and down, if you sprint 100 metres and you sit down and you're puffed and your heart's going 1,000 miles an hour, then you just wait and it all normalises. Well, the same thing will happen here. There's a bunch of chemicals that are racing through your body right now. All you need to do is just sit and allow those chemicals to do their thing and you will normalise. So the 5 steps are: sit down or lean against the wall. Breathe out first, focus on breathing out. Take slow breaths, have a drink of water, and just wait for 5 minutes. The reality is, we don't want to have panic attacks in the first place. We want to build a brain that is, by and large, more relaxed and less stressed. And this is possible. You can generate lasting change to the way you feel and experience the world if you understand how your brain works and what it's doing. I've been coaching executives for years, and they pay thousands of dollars for one-on-one coaching, which is not accessible for most people. Over the last 6 to 12 months, I've distilled those into 8 core concepts and built a program that's deliverable online and accessible to everybody. It's called my Think Well program online, and it will teach you how to build a brain and grow a brain that is more clear, more calm, more open, more fun to be in, and will improve your felt experience of life in that space. So if you want to dial down the stress, then I encourage you to take a look at my Think Well online program.